the world is changing, and it has been designed by men for so many years. So we need to start looking at it as it would be a blank canvas and start to see what has worked and how we can restructure some things.
I'm John Lewis, and you're listening to 360 Degree City, a podcast where we talk to people who are working to make cities better. Our hope is that after each episode, you'll start to see your own city from a slightly different angle. 360 Degree City is brought to you by the team at Intelligent Futures. We're a team of versatile urban problem solvers, and our aim is to figure out better ways of living together. Far too often, the people making decisions about our cities look too much like me. White, male, able-bodied, and if they're really like me, losing a bit of their hair. But if we want equitable cities and communities, we need a far wider range of folks at the table. So today, I'm talking to Paty Rios about the steps we need to take to create inclusive cities.
My name is Paty, and I work at Happy City. It's a Vancouver-based architecture and urban planning consultancy, and our priority is to boost happiness and design for well-being.
In this episode, Paty and I discuss her experiences in architecture school, some important urban and interior design considerations that are left out when it's just men at the table, and how we can make engagement processes more inclusive. In this episode, you'll hear a variety of background sounds, from a saxophone player to a dog and his squeaky toy. These are some of the joys of recording in a co-working space near a busy street. Can you maybe share your experiences growing up and your education in architecture school, and then particularly if there's a frame and a set of insights of learnings as it relates to issues around gender inequality?
Sure, absolutely. So I grew up in a small city, actually 2 hours north from Mexico City. It's called Querétaro, and I keep saying that it's a small city. However, it's a 1 million people city. And
it's all relative.
Not exactly. So it's not that small, but I remember growing up in the suburbs, and I remember that when we moved there when I was 6 years old, the most common thing to do after school was just to play in the streets. And the first house that we were living in, I remember it had this amazing garden. Well, actually, it was an empty lot that hadn't been built. And one of the neighbors had the amazing idea of just putting some grass in it. And then we started building a tree house, and we would use this space to play all the afternoon. So it was as I recall this experience, it was one of the early beginnings for me to understanding that I didn't need it to be at home to have fun. I could be in the street and it was safe and we could run around, and the dog would be also running with us and just meet with neighbors and friends. So that was pretty amazing. I grew up in the city as I grew older and started getting into high school, college. I immediately started using the car. It wasn't a very public transit-oriented city. And as every probably young teenager, I was excited by the fact that I was going to be using a car and that I was going to be riding across the city. And it doesn't last that long when you start figuring out that there's also traffic and there's also chaos in the streets. But yeah, I kind of was really immersed into studies. So then I went to architecture school. I think that one of the things that I remember a lot about architecture is having all of these wonderful experiences, getting to know cities, getting to know new people, new perspectives. But when I think about the equity side, I don't think that I had that much of female teachers. Most of my professors were male architects, and if I had any women teachers, they would be running probably the theoretical courses, not exactly the studios. Interesting, right? The only thing that I quite remember was that one of my professors during one of the studios, a male architect, we were designing a theater, and one of his questions was, "Why are you designing the washrooms in that way?" And I'm like, "What way? I mean, I'm dividing them among men and women." And he's like, "Well, have you ever been to a theater, and have you ever been standing in the women's line for at least 10 minutes before you were able to get in?" And I'm like, "Well, yeah. And then what do we do about this?" it was kind of like the first time that I understood that we were just used to the things and that they were meant to happen in a certain way, and that this was just going to be replicated. I think that was my first kind of like close contact with gender inequity and how the design wasn't addressing this. But I was really grateful that this professor marked that moment in my life. And after architecture school, I went into graduate studies. And I usually selected supervisors that were female. And I'm very grateful about this because I think that I started seeing a new perspective about the world that was out there. My PhD supervisor, actually, she's from Italy. And I remember that in our conversations, it wasn't not that much about like the design of the space, but actually about like human interactions and what we wanted to achieve, and what were the values that were embedded in society, and what were the values that we wanted to prioritize through the design of the city. So I remember having these conversations with her, very stimulating, a lot of engagement conversations, and she's kind of like my hero around engagement, and she has been doing this for a long time. And now that she's retired, she's actually an activist, and she's leading marches and talks, and it's very inspiring. And even my postdoctoral supervisor, she's also a woman. Just to see how a woman could enter into a room and be the center of attention and have this gravitas about her knowledge and about what she wanted to share that day was amazing. I learned so much from the engagement part with her, and I think that one of the most important things that I have taken since is that it's not about finding the perfect solution, but it's about finding the holistic approach that is going to work for everyone.
And when you mentioned the sort of gravitas that your advisor brought into a room, did that stand out for you? I guess on its own, or did it stand out in addition to, like, you hadn't seen many examples or role models that were women that had that?
I think that I hadn't seen like so many models that were like that. I think that my perspective was around like whenever I would find like a woman role model, it was more about the fact that was a very strong woman, a very strong voice, with very kind of like a set mind of her own, where everything is decided. But she was all the way around. She was inviting into conversation. She was trying to hear everyone. She was laughing about whatever mistakes she would make. But at the same time, she didn't lose gravitas. So it was very refreshing to see like how a woman could be like both respected, followed, be a guide in that moment, and at the end, we had marvelous results from each and every session or workshop that we were with her. Okay, so so that's really helpful, because I think oftentimes, in many of the city building professions, the conversation around, the framing of expertise is that gravitas comes from all the knowledge in your brain, and everybody should just adhere to that. Versus you can still have that, but still be humble enough and open enough to ask questions and add to the expertise in the room that might not come from a school. It might come from the lived experience in a particular community. And so to have that, it's a unique combination. I think most city building professionals need a bit more of the actual knowledge that you have, which a lot of people focus on, but also the confidence to be open and learn more. There's actually more confidence that comes from listening, I think, instead of just you feeling or thinking that you need all the answers inside yourself. Absolutely. I mean, like how we used to think that the people that had more knowledge were the ones that were in the most favorable spot to make the decisions. However, I mean, knowledge is all around the internet and it's online and you can find it everywhere and you can hear podcasts and you can hear people speaking. And it's about what you do with that knowledge. That is, I think, that most important. And having the ability to listen and actually listen and not just be preparing what you are going to respond when someone is talking. It's what makes a difference in between a good leader in the case that it might be like this person might be guiding a meeting and just trying to push through an agenda.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe let's dive into some specific issues around design and planning and the issues of gender. So what would be some of the specific, I mean, you gave a great example, and it's one of those that you know could seemingly be small and not meaningful, but your example of the washroom in the theater is a really good one. But what are some other specific design or planning considerations that are often left out when it's just men that are the only ones at the table?
Well, when it's just men at the table, I mean, the first thing that we gotta notice is that we're leaving out 50% of the population, and so we are building on the perspective on just 1/2 of the population, and that's the most important fact. I think one of the specifics is, for example, like think about snowplow. So whenever there's a big storm and the streets are covered with snow and the sidewalks are covered with snow, the city has designed that the first thing that needs to be plowed are the streets. Why? Because people need to get to work. And most likely people are going to be taking their cars if they are coming into the city. But if we look at this and analyze this from the woman's perspective, it doesn't show equity in the approach, in the sense that mainly men are the ones that are using cars to get into the city, but women are more likely to use a public transport. And women are more likely as well to be first leaving their kids at school or doing any other errands in the morning, and they need to use the sidewalks. So what happens, like the 3 first hours after they start cleaning the streets, men are going to be the ones that get to work first or to their activities, and women are going to be delegated to them to the end. And it's not only about the fact that we need to consider all of the population, but this actually has an effect in GDP. And the way the amount of accidents that happen in the sidewalks are even more than the ones that are happening in the street with cars. So it is much easier to go like with a car and drive through 3 inches of snow that go through with a stroller or with a kid and try to get them to school because there's snow in the sidewalk. So it's just about like this. You wouldn't imagine that there's a connection between gender equity, between how you clean the streets after a snowstorm, but it actually is.
If you want to learn more about how snowplowing can be sexist, check out Caroline Criado Perez's book, Invisible Women, Data Bias in a World Designed for Men. It's a great book explaining how our cities, schools, offices, and hospitals typically leave out the needs of women.
And another one that is very interesting, the way that we are designing our public spaces. So public spaces are designed usually so that people can enjoy them during the daylight. But as we all know, there's a lot of countries, a lot of cities in the world that the daylight is going to be short during several months of the year. So that means that starting from 3 to 4 p.m., probably we're not going to have light anymore. So that means that women become the more vulnerable population to be crossing across the public realm, public spaces. And if we haven't designed with enough lights, and if we don't consider the quality of that light, that can also be dangerous. So take, for instance, a woman that is walking through a soccer field, and this kind of light is very intense, and it actually doesn't allow you to see what's happening like 5 meters where you are across from where you are walking. So it completely blinds you. So instead of creating this safe spot where you are actually able to see what's going to happen, it blinds you. So it makes the same effect as not having this a proper amount of illumination, of lighting. So this is another one of the factors that also affects how women use the city.
I can't recall how long ago it was. It was probably within the last year, maybe a little more. There was a Twitter trend, and it was talking about basically asking women, what would you do if at night if men didn't exist? And it was really basic, but also disturbing for somebody, a relatively able-bodied male that, again, this frame doesn't come across my day-to-day. It comes across more and more because I have a wife and a daughter, and that helps me broaden my perspective. But it was really, I'd say disturbing how basic the things were. I would go for a run. I would go get groceries. These kinds of things that folks feel that women feel that they can't go do just because of the safety issue and lighting and public design. It was really and there was lots of Twitter replies of men that were saying, they were thanking people for sharing that because it was eye opening to them. So we'll see if we can find it and post some of that on the show notes, because it was really, like I say, so basic but so jarring at the same time.
It is indeed very basic. I mean, I was just trying to think about what would I do. I mean, with that situation. I think that, I would do everything that I do on a daily basis, but there would be other small things that probably change. For example, I know that when I have to use a subway or when I'm going to bike to work, I got to select my clothes accordingly. So, so I'm not going to be able to wear a skirt probably, or I'm just going to cover myself and make sure that I'm not driving attention to myself. That would be for me the difference. And of course, depending on the city that you live, it's a different experience, the one that you live. I travel a lot in between Vancouver and Mexico, and it's completely different. The patterns that I follow when I'm walking around in Mexico City and when I'm walking in Vancouver, just from the fact that in Vancouver I can be walking with my headphones and just listening to music, and probably just lower a little bit down the volume so that I can hear cars and know what's happening in the surroundings. But in Mexico City, I know that if I'm walking my dog after 8 in the dark, I'm not going to be wearing headphones for sure, because I need to be aware about the noises and what is happening in my surroundings. So even though I feel safer with a dog, I still need to take extra care of myself because I want to avoid any possible bad circumstance.
And does the walking of the dog, is that part of the 8 o'clock at night walk? Would you choose to go on a walk by yourself at 8 o'clock at night in Mexico City where you live?
Oh no, definitely not. And I wouldn't choose to walk without my dog after 8. And especially I live just across a park, and it's a wonderful park. It has had some history about being unsafe at some points and then being very, very safe. But it's just crossing through a park, and it has good lighting, and there's other people walking as well. But it's just, there's history. And you want to make sure that you're on the safe side. For sure. Yeah. It's personal safety is not something you ever want to mess around with. And if there's history and just understanding these layers, like you mentioned, even the clothes you wear. I'm one of the least stylish people ever, so I give it no thought. But for folks for women to have to go through that, it's again kind of disturbing and kind of basic all at once, which is not great. It's just another layer that you have to include into your morning routine, and that you have to start thinking about specific things, and you have to plan all the day so that for example, I don't use a car to go to work. I use a bicycle, and sometimes I'm going to have a meeting, so I'm going to use public transport. And if at some point I need an Uber, then that makes another time of commuting, which actually reminds me about this other very interesting difference in how women and men experience the city, and it's just the daily patterns. And women are more likely to do trip chaining, so to do more trips during the day, and they are more likely to walk, to use a bike, to use public transport, to probably use a cab. And men are more likely to just use the car to go to work and then back. but women need to add these items, like, for example, just leaving the kid in the school, or picking up groceries, or going to the dry cleaners, or going to the pharmacy. So it adds up. And if you consider how cities were designed in the mid-19th, it was all about the car, and it was prioritizing men that were living in suburbia or in whatever neighborhood they were living to get to their work and then get back. But since women weren't working, or at least not most of them, then those kind of trips weren't as prioritized as the car. So cities start to be designed according to the car, and that's where we start seeing the highways that are built across all cities and killing most of the walkable neighborhoods that existed at that point. And it just makes you think, like, why, if we know that these patterns exist, the train chaining, why do we keep building cities in the same way? And why do we keep investing in the same elements? And how does this reflect in our GDP? I don't know if there's actually a study that has actually been diving into this, but I'm sure that it has a deep impact. How long is it going to take a mom to drive her kid to the daycare and then go to work, instead of going to work and directly having a daycare in the ground floor and being able to visit your kid like for 1 hour during lunch?
Right.
So it talks to the how we organize our lives, but also how we are more economically efficient, and how we also spend more time building bonds than commuting.
Right, which is one of the criticisms of the auto-oriented city, but this just puts another really important layer on that, and sort of bolsters the argument just from another layer or a different perspective, which is hugely helpful.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So are there any other examples you can think of or actions that have been implemented in terms of, we talked about kind of the city perspective, the city design. What other actions can you think of that could be implemented or carried out in women's lives in, say, office space or transit, or even in their own homes that can accommodate the needs of women in our cities?
So there's two examples, and the first one, we run into this piece of evidence because we were preparing a workshop, and we were trying to go deep into interior design and how the office environment might affect the way in which we are productive and we are creative. So, the first one is that we found that women are likely to have a lower metabolic rate than men. However, like the temperature that was determined as being the ideal for office space was determined in the 1960s, considering a 40-year-old man and weighing 154 pounds. So you can imagine that women's metabolic rate being 30 or 35% lower than men, it is more likely for them to feel cold. And when women feel cold, they are less likely to be creative and to be efficient. So if you just consider like this little pattern or this little design flaw in how the temperature is controlled and how it is favoring the way that men are used to work instead of how women would be in a more comfortable space, then you start as well questioning the fact of how could we be able to control a little bit more our temperature in these open floor plans in offices where we are working this nowadays, and that we are all subject like to the same room temperature. So that's one. Mm-hmm. The other piece of information that we found about the office space was that women are more likely to make calls, like personal calls, during office hours. So when they're at the workplace, they're going to be probably like arranging doctor appointments for children, or they are going to be talking to a parent, or they are going to be making sure that the electrician goes to home at 5 because they need to fix something. So the suggestion was, well, we need to start building or including phone booths in every single office space so that women feel comfortable about all of these things that they need to carry on during the office hours and not feel that they are missing out or interrupting in the open floor space plan. But then it got me thinking, I mean, is it really about just including phone booths in the places where they are more likely to be dominated by women? Or is it about including phone booths in all offices so that you can start seeing a change in behavior, and not only women but actually men are also encouraged to be taking care of this personal appointments or personal tasks during office hours. And it wouldn't take like more than 15 minutes a day probably, but it's opening the possibility for men and women to being responsible about taking care of their home and their family in an equitable way, and the office space is promoting it. So it's also about the way we frame it. It's not about just adding things so that women can have happier lives or to increase the amount of tasks that they are able to do through the day, but how are we promoting an equitable approach to how work is accessible to everyone, in which the taking care of the home is accessible to everyone, and also like growing up a family is accessible to everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I mean, that's thank you for that, because that's extraordinarily timely, selfishly for me, because we're in the middle of designing a mixed-use project for my family and my company. So we're designing office space for Intelligent Futures as we speak. So this is really, really helpful, selfishly for me. But that's it's.
I'm glad.
It's two birds with one stone.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, the other thing that I was thinking about is we know that families are changing, and the way that we perceive a family is no longer like a mom, a dad, and 2 or 3 kids. Families come out in all sorts of flavors and colors, and with different members of the family. So as we start imagining how 21st century families look like, it might be like 2 moms and 1 kid, it might be 1 dad and 2 kids, it might be 1 mom and 3 kids, and or maybe the extended family is living with the mom and the dad to take care of the 3 kids. So as we start analyzing all of these different configurations, we also start looking at homes and how apartments are built, because, you know, like cities are growing, and we know that we need to start including more densified areas. And while apartments and skyscrapers have been kind of like the easiest answer to this growth and density, they are not the most friendly typology in which we are building homes. But then we start thinking and adding complexity to this part in which culture is changing and how families are changing. And then one of the things that we have been working with and that we were imagining is like, well, what if you start by adding more spaces to socialize? What if you start tailoring buildings, multifamily buildings, in a way in which there's space for everyone? So you don't have just 2-bedroom apartments across the building so that you're expecting the same amount of people to live in each and every single apartment, but you actually consider the single bachelor apartment, and then you have the family apartment probably with 2 bedrooms or 3 bedrooms, or even with an extended family that has a possibility of having a 3-bedroom plus 1 bedroom that can be rented or can be flexible across time, so that the residents can use it for different purposes. And building on this idea, what happens when we start understanding that the amenity rooms, for example, that are so underused in building apartments, you could take that space and actually build it into the hallways. So, you know, for example, that whenever a mom is heavily pregnant and is in her last 8th or 9th month, or probably has already given birth and it's the 3 first months, most likely what I hear from my friends is it's such a lonely time, because you spend a lot of time inside your house. You don't have like clear connection. There's family visiting, but after that, I mean, you're all alone and you're not allowed probably like to leave your home. And this is something that happens to a lot of people. So that increases the likelihood to have postpartum depression as well. But what if we start building communities And the design takes the shape of this community in the way that social corridors, for example, that are connecting the different doors to the apartments are not just a hallway, but are actually a social corridor when you can have like a Dutch door that opens to the corridor, or you can have a little table for kids to play, or you can have a coffee table so that you can meet with a neighbor, or you can have a space where you keep appliances and you can share those appliances with neighbors. So as we understand what are the barriers and what are the different challenges that we face through life, we understand that there's a different way in which we could be responding to them and that we could be promoting more positive social connections.
Paty and her team at Happy City have done a lot of fascinating research about how we can think about multifamily homes. Their Happy Homes Toolkit provides considerations for how we can design housing that's more sociable. Check out the link in our show notes. That's really insightful, and it just, like I'm thinking, knowing that you have a lot of time and connection with Vancouver, some friends and relatives that live in apartments in Vancouver got me thinking about those kinds of spaces. They have party spaces and gathering spaces that basically just collect dust, and then the hallways are utilitarian spaces that everyone just gets through as quickly as possible. And so just that idea of reconfiguring your how you understand a city or how you understand a community and the form that could follow that, it's really, really interesting. One of the things I wanted to chat with you about was, so we've talked a lot about the physical elements of the city and how it relates to these issues of gender. How can we, the kind of the process of city building and the conversations that we have collectively in our communities, how can we make engagement processes more inclusive from your perspective?
That's a tough one. But I also love this question. I think that one of my favorite topics is engagement, of course. And I think that there are three aspects that we need to work with. The first one, I'm talking about creating a more inclusive city, would be to have more women designing cities. Just have more women in authority positions. And I'm going to get deeper in each one of this, but I just wanted to kind of flag them. So that's the first one, having more women in authority positions that are able to design cities. The second one, we need a different approach or upgrade our engagement process so that women actually participate. There are so many things and so many ways that we could be improving this engagement process, and I'll also get into that. The third one is that I think that this is the most difficult one to do, is we need to toss out the window the established agreements, the established paradigms. The world is changing, and it has been designed by men for so many years. So we need to start looking at it as it would be a blank canvas and start to see what has worked and how we can restructure some things. But going back a little bit, to the first aspect that I was mentioning, that we need more women designing cities and in authority position. So it's very interesting how, for example, in planning schools and architecture schools, 60% of the enrolled students are likely to be women. But then as they move into the workforce, this number starts decreasing. So it is likely that by the time where women are in between 33 or 35 years old, this has been reduced in planning positions to 30%. So there's a very interesting study that talks about what are the different aspects, or what could be probably the different aspects that are causing this decrease. And I mean, it's very simple actually if you think about this. So you graduate and probably you end up doing a master's, and then you are 26, 27 years old. Then you go into the job and you start working as a junior architect or planner. And then as you start getting a little bit of more seniority, you reach your 33 or 35 years old. And then the biological clock is ticking as well. So if you want to be able to have kids, but also to have a good professional career, it kind of puts you in a very stressful position in which you actually have to choose, at least for the next 2 or 3 years. So this becomes a barrier in the sense that you have to move away a little bit from the workforce and then find the adequate way and the tools so that you can be engaged again. And what happens is that we think that there are policies in place that are going to support women having full lives, but there are so many things that still can be done. So this is one of the reasons that women don't get to this authority position until probably they are like 38 or 40 years old, but then they have to make a life decision before that. The other part is that there are not a lot of positions where women are gonna find the possibility to shine and to be able to be in the workplace. What do I mean by this? There's a lot of competitiveness, and especially if you don't consider quotas and one way of moving the needle a little bit forward, then you are gonna find women, instead of collaborating, competing for a position. So we need to increase as well the number of positions that are available for women, so that you know that women are going to help each other instead of being competing for the same spot. And then finally, I mean, just being a woman, I mean, as a woman, you hear so many times this phrase about, well, let's try to dial down the emotion a little bit. Let's try to be a little bit more efficient. Let's try to be more rational. There are so many things that are pointed out that makes women feel that there's something wrong with them in the way that they probably like process a situation or try to address a problem, that this, of course, lowers your confidence. So instead of like trying to fix how women think, it would be about embracing how women think and how we can make the best of how the different like men's brains and women's brains can actually work together.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just an idea out there.
Yeah, for sure. And those are, I think, really important, societal, cultural issues. And then that translates obviously to individual organizations within societies, within professions, to think about that and the at every chance to challenge assumptions, because a lot of times folks don't, they aren't front of mind. They just assume certain things, and there's generational issues for sure. But, I've spoken with women that are in tremendous spots in their career, and they're in positions of, really strong influence. And they've told me that, as one very specific example, long ago, they stopped bringing notebooks to meetings because it's assumed in a meeting that they'll just take the notes for everybody or take the minutes. And so, they're at they just, it's a practice, a habit that they just stopped and just sort of avoid that assumption. But again, like one of those things that I would, until I heard these stories, I would never think to bring a notebook or not based on those kinds of things. So, it's a really micro to the macro. It's these issues need to be addressed in every way.
Absolutely. And now that you mentioned this, another strategy also when you're coming into a meeting space, just sit as far away from the coffee maker as you can. Because if not, you might be expected to bring the coffee to everyone.
Yeah, bonkers. It's bonkers.
And I think like one of the great ones is like how we carry on engagement. And I wanted to just talk a little bit about this because the way that we carry on engagement is so systematized that we're missing a lot of voices. And by the way that it needs to fit like the office hours, we don't get a lot of participation from people that might be at work. And what happens is that we get ending up with the same people participating in community workshops or engagement in which we have like a lot of gray hair in the room. So if we start understanding how or working around women's schedules and when they are going to be like taking, for example, kids to school, or if they are going to be free at 7 p.m., or if they're going to be free probably in the morning, or if we need to consider someone or to implement a temporary daycare in a specific public space while we are doing this workshop, then that's the way to go. Because if we don't understand the barriers and the challenges, then we are not making it easy. And public policy is all about making it easy and helping people do what is gonna promote or increase their well-being. So that would be like one of the big ones. Just understand who is not in the room and what can we do to bring them into the room. Because if we continue just to analyze data, to analyze patterns about what is being done, then we are not understanding who is missing out of these experiences because there are some barriers that haven't been addressed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really important point, and I think the obviously the engagement process focuses on who is in the room and what they've said, and then translates whatever is said in the room as the voice of the community. But if you ask that really simple but fundamental question, who's not in the room and why aren't they there, then you start to modify your process and start to see the diversity of insights that are often not represented when it's easy for affluent homeowners to show up.
Exactly.
Yeah, for sure. As a particular example.
Yeah.
So if you could say anything to aspiring female planners or designers out there, what kinds of tips, encouragements, advice would you give those folks that are listening?
I would tell them just to be bold, to dare to say what they think out loud. I would tell them that things have happened in a certain way because we haven't dared to speak out and what we think that might be right. There's a culture default, there's a male default in all of our brains, no matter if you are a male or if you are a woman. So we need to start addressing that and being very critical about the way and the decision-making process that we are taking. And while designing, you shouldn't not shut down your fears and perceptions. You are not required to think like a man. We bring a different lens into the design of the city. And women have actually a superpower. For centuries, we have relied in creating trust in relationships and taking care of others. So social trust is at the top of our values. So whenever there's your gut telling you that there's something that needs to be done to encourage some kind of positive relationship, it needs to be done. Also, don't be afraid to ask for more. And don't be afraid to fill a quota, because at the beginning you can be a quota, but also you have the abilities and you have all what it takes to shine in that spot. And don't be afraid of wanting a fulfilling life that includes a personal and a professional life, because it is possible. It's not asking for too much. And I think, I think that the last one is don't see women as competition, as your competition. We are all in the same pathway. We are all facing the same challenges. So why not give a hand to the person that is besides you? And whatever one head is not gonna come up with, two heads maybe will.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. I'm going to make sure to share this particular part of the interview with my 9-year-old.
Awesome.
We just have one more question. It's something that we ask all the guests on the podcast. Can you tell me about a city that you love and why you love it?
I love so many cities. One of the cities that I love is Rio de Janeiro, and it's not close to be the most equitable city. It's just the diversity that it brings into the world. It's amazing. There's such a wide variety of people. There's such a wide variety of activities happening. The city is alive during the day, during the night. There's so much social trust. And of course, there's a lot of social issues that are happening there, but it kind of has all of the right elements that it takes to build a great city. It's about ordering a little bit the processes and making systems so that people can actually shine and flourish. But I would say that's one of my favorite. It has the perfect mix in between culture and geographical diversity as well. So you can be on top of a mountain in one moment, and you can be close to the sea in the other. And you can be listening to jazz, and then you can be listening to a Roomba during the night. So it's got it all.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. It's one of the I was floored when I went. It was just it's one of the most alive cities I've ever been to. It's just phenomenal. Yeah.
that's the description. It's an alive city.
This conversation with Paty was eye-opening for me in the best way possible. Although we have a ton of work to do to create more equitable cities for everybody, I'm inspired that change is occurring. If we start considering the varied impacts of how snowplow routes are planned, or how office spaces are designed, how public spaces are constructed, we'll be making positive progress towards more inclusive cities for everybody. 360 Degree City is created by our team at Intelligent Futures. To learn more about the work we do, go to intelligentfutures.ca. I'm John Lewis. Thanks for stopping by.